Hello, hello. I'm gonna put everyone to a breakout room, really quick, just so we could discuss a few things. Perfect. Hello. Awesome. Okay. Just for now, head to the breakout rooms. Hey, Rebecca. I'm just putting everyone in breakout rooms right now, just so we're not on the main live stream.
Okay, because I was going to say, I can see you in the live stream.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's everyone. Sarah's joining us.
Yeah, she'll join at some
Awesome.
point.
Okay. All right. Just join the breakout room. Oh, there you go. Hi, Sarah. I'm just putting everyone in breakout rooms right now, just so we're not on the main live stream. And then we'll talk there.
Thank you.
Hi, Amelia. I'm just putting everyone in the breakout room, then we'll talk there.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Hi, Leslie. I'm just putting everyone in a breakout room, so just join the breakout room.
Okay.
Awesome.
Hello, and welcome to this year's Future City Experience. My name is Rebecca White, and I am here on behalf of Engineers Canada and Engineers of Tomorrow, two of three organizations who have come together to make this opportunity available to you today. Engineers Canada works on behalf of the provincial and territorial regulate the associations that regulate the engineering practice and license the country's 300,000 engineers. We also serve as the national voice of the engineering profession and are very proud of the work that's being done to engage young people like yourselves, helping you to learn all about the fascinating and rewarding opportunities that you can pursue as an engineer. Now, this is work that wouldn't be possible without the generous support of our fantastic partner, Ontario Tech University, an organization that is helping to train the next generation of engineers. Before we start getting curious about designing cities of the future, I want to take a minute to acknowledge the lands that we are on today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. And while we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take this a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands that we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of that land, unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the effects of residential schools and colonialism on Indigenous families and communities, and to consider how we can, each in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. All right, you are all here today because you have accepted our challenge to design a future city adapted to the impacts of climate change. This is no easy task. So to help you get started, we have sought out experts that are doing this work in real life, researching, testing, designing ways to help us take care of our planet. To get you started thinking about this project, I'm going to pass you over to our moderator for today's event. Dr. Daniel Hornvig is an associate professor at Ontario Tech University. For almost 20 years, he worked with the World Bank, including as lead advisor overseeing sustainable cities and climate change programs. He was the Chief Safety and Risk Officer for the province of Ontario from 2012 to 2020. Dan began his career in waste management, working for the City of Guelph and region of Peel in Ontario, and the government of Bermuda. He has worked with more than 400 governments on waste management and resource issues and published extensively in the sector. Dan is a fellow with Canada's Transition Accelerator and the Global Cities Institute at the University of Toronto. And he chairs the region of Durham's roundtable on climate change. Dan researches energy and material flows of cities and urban systems. We're so grateful to have him here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Daniel Hornvig.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining, and thank you to the teachers for rounding up everyone. So today we have we have a very big challenge for you on how to design sustainable cities, where we're going, what kind of cities you'll likely be living in when you graduate or when you start looking for jobs. And so to get things started off, we have some questions on Slido for you. So you can see hopefully the number to join. So please do join and answer the polls. And hopefully you've voted. Okay, And we have 4 great panelists to help us try and make sense of all of this. We have Connor, Janessa, Amelia, and Leslie Ann, and they will all introduce themselves more fully. But you're definitely in good hands. So why don't we go to the next step, the question and answers. Aha, somebody's thinking like an engineer already. How do we estimate the cost of the project? Are we allowed to use ideas that already exist? Well, yes, any good engineer always uses previous ideas. There's a lovely saying, you know, we stand tall when we stand on the shoulders of giants, the people who came before us. Does your idea have to be realistic? How good are the solar panels actually for the environment? Oh yeah, there's a great question.
Hi, Dan. I just wanted to see if maybe before we jump right into the questions, maybe we could take a few minutes for the panelists to introduce themselves. It might spark some curiosity from those out there once you meet all these amazing panelists and hear what they're working on.
Great idea. Shall we go in order? Do you want to start, Connor?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We hope we can show you a little bit of what it means to be an engineer. There are many kinds of engineer. I myself am a renewable energy engineer, so I design wind and solar farms primarily. I also have a little bit of experience doing climate change research in our polar regions, the Arctic and the Antarctic. So open to all kinds of questions you have about that. The specific kind of engineer I am is a civil engineer. So buildings, structures, transportation, that kind of thing. Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Connor. Janessa?
Thanks, Dan. My name is Janessa Doherty. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, assuming that everyone can hear me. So give me, yeah, awesome. Thanks for the thumbs up. So I have the privilege of working from home for my job, which means I get to both work and play in Grand Valley, Ontario, which is within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee peoples, part of Treaty 18. So I have worked in the climate sector for a number of years, mostly related to policy, climate policy specifically, and equity at the intersection of water and energy. I am not an engineer myself, but I have had the privilege of collaborating with a number of engineers over the years, mostly with renewable energy, energy efficiency, and low carbon and resilient buildings. While I'm not working, I do spend a lot of my time either outside hiking or snowshoeing. I curl and play soccer, and I also enjoy playing guitar and reading. So that's a little bit about my professional and personal life.
Great. Thanks, Janessa. Amelia?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Amelia Beliveau, and I am the Energy Transition Program Manager at Environmental Defence Canada. I've been really lucky. I've worked on climate change over the past decade or so in a lot of different ways. My current role as Energy Transition Program Manager is to do a lot of advocacy work, so advocating for policies that make the energy transition possible and enable our phase out of fossil fuels. And before this, I was working with the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation for the government of BC. And in that role, it was really focused on energy efficiency, so residential home energy efficiency for remote and Indigenous communities, and a lot of community scale renewable energy development projects. And I'm joining you today from Montreal, and very lucky to be here, new to this land, but happy to be calling in from the territory of the Kanagahaga.
Great. Thanks, Amelia. And last but certainly not least, Leslie Ann.
Hello. My name is Leslie Ann Sathamore. I currently am the campaigns director at an organization called Raven. I am currently calling in from Alberta, from Treaty 6 territory of Métis and Cree Nations, specifically. I'm closest to right now the Beaver Lake Cree Nation. And at Raven, what we do is we support Indigenous communities and Indigenous nations that are engaging with the legal system to protect their rights and to protect the environment. And I came to this work not as an engineer, but as actually a lawyer. And I've spent a lot of my time as a lawyer and in my previous career working at the intersections of policy and the science, for lack of a better way of phrasing that. I spent a lot of time with scientists and engineers and people doing the research, doing the work, and translating their information into something that the general public can understand and something that can be used to develop some policy and to engage the public at large in issues relating to environmental protection and climate change. I am originally from Ontario, but I'm now living on the West Coast in Victoria. And when I'm not working, I can be found. I occasionally guide backcountry canoe trips, I scuba dive, and I am happiest when I'm on the water and outside of the city. And that's a little bit about me.
Great. Well, thank you all. And as mentioned, you can see that we're all in good hands. We have across the entire country, we have all sorts of experience, and you've been providing some great questions. I guess, Rebecca, do we just want to maybe go around with all of the panelists and see which questions they may want to try and answer? There's a bunch of good ones.
Yeah, there's so many awesome questions coming in. Thank you everyone for submitting them. So you could see the ones that are showing up on the screen there. And if you are in Slido right now, you can, if there's questions in there that you're really interested in hearing the response to, you can upvote them. So maybe we go after the ones that have the highest interest right now. It looks like that top question right now, 18 different people have an interest in that one. So maybe we could start there.
Great. Shall we go through maybe go the same order as before, and put the onus on Cotter to start?
Absolutely. I'll give it a shot, and then people can jump in and add to my comment. We call this cost estimating in the industry, and there's two big sides: materials and labor, largely. So figure out what your project is made of, all the different pieces that go into it, how much steel, how much rebar, carbon fiber, nanotubes, I don't know what you're constructing. And then on the other side, how long might it take to put it together, and what kind of people are required to do that? Those are the most simple building blocks, is what it takes and how many people it takes to put it together. And so what I would say, and you can go into more detail from there.
Okay. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I might just contribute, Dan. I think Connor makes some really excellent points in the actual financial cost of different types of projects. One thing that we're starting to learn a little bit more about is how to include the social cost and the environmental cost into projects. So there's a lot of different tools that will help engineers and other folks that work within the project team to help determine that the lowest cost material might not necessarily be the most sensible material, because it might carry with it some environmental or social costs. And so we look at things like the triple bottom line, is when you're looking at the economical costs, the social costs, and the environmental costs, and then reconciling all of those things through consultation and collaboration with the community in which you are thinking about initiating this project. And so with that, I'll hand over to Leslie Ann, who I see has turned her camera on.
I was going to jump in and add, but Janessa, you covered what I was going to add, so I'm good to move on.
Teamwork makes the dream work, Leslie Ann.
Right. No, I think that's a great point, Janessa. I mean, as human beings, we tend to focus more on the purchase price and don't focus as much as perhaps we should on the operating costs. So, and oftentimes operating costs may end up being more than the actual purchase price, but they happen over a long period of time. We also have a thing that engineers are always worried about called externalities, which is basically somebody's getting a free ride. So for pollution, for example, if you dump all the pollution in the river and you haven't incorporated it in your costs, somebody else is paying those costs. So that's always an issue. All right.
Maybe I'll just add on to that.
Please.
My addition was going to be too, like all of these projects and things you're going to be building take place on land somewhere, and so the cost of the land value is of course part of that. And some people might put that in the category of materials, but I really wanted to go back to the comments that were made earlier about that land. Whose land is it, and how are they being compensated for the use of that land? And then on the point of externalities too, with certain types of projects, this is where it sort of intersects with government policy, because with certain types of projects, like big industrial projects, you're also going to be having costs associated with, for example, putting a price on carbon. So that's with the carbon tax that's in place and set to go up. That's one of those types of policy costs that's intended to address the externalities that Daniel was just mentioning there. So in addition to the materials and the labor, which are a great foundation, there are additional costs that come into play too.
Can I use that answer to segue into one of the other questions that's up on the board that is related with the incorporation of government policy into future cities? Is that all right with everyone?
Sure. Okay. Good idea.
With what was just mentioned around government policies and how to accommodate for those externalities and whose lands and things like that, it's really important we consider government policy in these future cities, because engineering can't exist in a vacuum. Engineering will interact with everything in that city, everything around us. And the rules and the framework set by government policy give the structure under which the engineering can happen. So the example that was given here was taxing destruction of ecosystems. That's one way you address those externalities. If you dump the pollution in the river, somebody else is paying for it. But by ensuring that there's a big enough cost to the company for dumping the pollution in the river, means they're not going to do it because it's going to cost them too much. And it's through those kinds of policies that you can keep the engineering and keep the project and keeping the development in the framework that you want, in the framework that your public, that your city, that your community can decide on. And that's something that today we really struggle with, because we didn't understand a lot of those externalities and impacts when we began a lot of types of development. And now we're seeing those impacts. And you're seeing a lot of communities and a lot of First Nations now working towards a push for taking cumulative impacts into account, for taking the impacts not just of the building of the project, but the ongoing impacts of what that project might be into account, because we better understand now that those impacts are going to be lifelong and in some cases permanent. And it's through policy that we can ensure that they're considered.
No, that's a great point. Thanks, Leslie Ann. Any other thoughts, comments? Do we want to move to another question?
I have a touch to add to that. And maybe it'll help us segue into this concept of, do we need to use current day assumptions in our designs? I like to think that engineers can also be agents of social change. So as you think about the society that your projects and cities might be in 100 years, maybe we've already established universal basic income, or autonomous robots have replaced a substantial percentage of jobs. How does the world that you engineer within change in the next century as well? And how naive and utopian can you imagine that society to be? Yeah.
That's a good point.
I might also just add one thing, Dan, quickly, if that's all right.
Please.
So I actually work for the federal government in a department that sometimes helps to advance policy. And so when we think about projects and we think about engineers' roles in projects, an engineer is one person in a much larger project team that's creating and designing a project. And before a project can even kind of be created, a proposal needs to be developed. And that proposal needs to go to the municipality, which is the city or the province or the community in which that project is going to take place. So maybe it's, for example, the creation of a low carbon building or the retrofit of an existing building. And so a lot of the times when you have this proposal, you need to take it to your community. And the community has a lot easier time accepting your proposal if it aligns with either the municipal, the provincial, or the federal policy. And aligning with the policy actually helps because it will enable your project in a lot of places to get funding. So this will help the financial component that Connor was speaking to earlier. If you are aligning with policy, then that means that you qualify or could qualify for special funding and help from the government. So this is one other element why incorporating government policy is actually a really great initiative to try and incorporate into your project.
Well, that's a good point. And one thing on that issue of government policy is one of the hardest things about any city is deciding who pays. And there's always big fights, kind of, because everybody wants to pay less, but a lot of these things cost a lot more than we think. So, for example, in most of our cities, governments today are borrowing to keep the price of, let's say, energy lower than it really is, which then has to be paid back in future, which isn't really fair to future generations, but it's how the voting and the public policy works. So on the public policy issue, I think it's a really important thing to also think about who's paying and how and when. So that's always important for public policy. Okay, shall we move to maybe another? We have some specific detail questions about where you might be getting the information and some of the details. This one on how good are solar panels for making energy. Does anybody want to try that? Connor?
I'll certainly get started on it, and then as always, people can jump in. I like to tie this to the topic below of do we have to use, again, today's assumptions. Because if you look out in the world today, you'll see solar panels are becoming far more common than they used to be. And that's because the technology has become far cheaper on a cost per unit energy perspective in the last decade or two. And I'll use wind energy as an example to compare the two. Like what makes something good at making energy? Amelia talked about land use. Solar power is about 20% efficient, give or take, but it often takes up a lot of area. You need to cover a whole farming field to get the same energy that you would from one 300-meter tall wind turbine. So on a spatial or area consumption basis, solar is dispersed. And other energy uses can be very concentrated. You need a lot less area to run a natural gas turbine. But that, again, is all limited by today's assumptions. And in a century, who knows? Using wind as the example, even a decade ago when I started in this industry, our turbines were at most 50 meters tall, and they could make enough power for 100 homes. Today, a single turbine is 400 or so feet tall and can power most of a small town. And that's just because of material science developments. We can control the blades better. and we can build them taller because of that. So in a century, if we figured out carbon nanotubes, you could have wind turbines that are 4 kilometers tall. You could have a space elevator shipping solar panels to the moon and laser beaming energy back to your city. Anything could be possible depending on how material science goes. So that might be how I start the conversation on this big topic. Yeah.
I wanted to jump in and add, so we can talk about how good something is at producing energy around, its energy density, but there's lots of other qualities about energy generation that we want to consider, especially when we're thinking about designing a future city. So how adaptable is it to what your city's needs are? And so with solar, one of the things, of course, that makes it does take up a lot of space, but in certain ways, that space is multifunctional. So you can use the space below the solar panels to do agriculture, for example. Or if you wanted, you could integrate it really thoroughly throughout the buildings in your city. And whether, we're sort of think about rooftop solar as what that could look like, but there's lots of other ways that solar could be integrated into, especially if you're in a city with a lot of tall glass towers and things like this, where we're developing new technologies around solar to make it even more possible to integrate into things that are already existing. So when we're talking about how good something is at making energy, there's the rate of conversion around that energy, but there's also, I think, what makes it good, a whole slate of other qualities. So how resilient is it? How do you want the energy system to be a small microgrid that's independent and managed in a really adaptive way? Or do you want it to be big and connected to external energy sources or other cities? So there's lots of different ways we can think about what is good energy that are taking lots of other qualities into consideration.
Great, thanks. Janessa?
Thank you. I would just add to Amelia and Connor's really fantastic comments. So Connor spoke a little bit about, the land use and space and the different types of technologies and their advancements over the years. And Amelia talked a little bit about the city's needs. And I would just add that the type of renewable energy technology that you're using should also be informed by the type of environment and the type of climate and region that you're working with in Canada. So if we continue to go with the example of solar, I live in a forest pretty much. And I would love to adopt solar, but it is not the most suitable renewable energy for my home because I don't get a lot of sun. And so that is just meant to provide the example that the type of renewable energy that you use needs to be heavily dependent on where you are in Canada and your regional characteristics and the topography. The other one element that I would add is the social acceptance of that renewable energy. And so this is why I would come back to that point that consultation is so important. It doesn't matter how good your renewable energy is or how much energy it's going to provide for you. If your community is averse or they are not accepting of the renewable energy that you want to apply in the community, then that resistance is going to create a lot of problems. So making sure that there's meaningful consultation and meaningful collaboration with the community about what type of renewable energy project is most suitable for them is really important.
No, great point. Thanks, Janessa. And great point also from, we have a panelist in British Columbia and one in Quebec where almost 100% of their electricity is from renewables, from hydro. So a great example of kind of horses for courses and where things make the most sense. Leslie Ann, did you have your hand up?
I did. I was just going to add that in conversations around climate change and climate action and renewable energy, something also to remember is we often get really stuck on this idea of what's the best, what's the most efficient, what's the most, the best, whatever kind of adjective you want to use. But in my opinion, generally the best is the one that you can do. And there's a fine balance between, I'm not saying don't do your research, I'm not saying don't consult, but some action is better than, no action. And so often trying to find the best or the perfect solution results in no action, or at least delayed action. And so when thinking about, is solar the best option? If you have people wanting to do solar, that's better than nothing. And so maybe that is the best option for you because it's what you can do. You can always change your mind later. You can always continue to do the research and change your mind, develop something more efficient, but it's always better to do something when you have the chance.
What a great point. Yeah, let us not be so preoccupied making the world perfect that we don't make it better. Okay, shall we maybe move on to another question? Some of these are really good. Thank you, everyone. Oh, here's a good, well, how can we create more power but less climate change? Renewables would be one way, I suppose. Using a lot less energy would also be a way. I don't know, are there any of the panelists want to jump in on, we've got all sorts of good questions. Maybe climate change and public health, Janessa?
I was just going to say, related to the second part of that question, is how do we create more climate change, or how do we reduce climate change? So I'll leave the first part of that question, how do we create more power, to the engineers and experts in the room. And I'll tackle the second part of that question, which is creating a culture of conservation and sustainability. And these are things like behavioral changes. We produce less climate change, we produce fewer greenhouse gases when we make better, more informed decisions. So choosing active transportation instead of a single occupancy vehicle, choosing even sometimes the food that you select has different carbon footprints, and determining your diet and what you're going to eat based on what has, the highest or lowest carbon footprint. We make these decisions with our purchasing power. So are you purchasing things that are locally sourced and locally made, or are you purchasing things that come a lot further away from your home and therefore carry a larger carbon footprint? So sometimes, to Leslie Ann's earlier point, the path of least resistance is often the easiest and lowest hanging fruit. So making better, more informed choices on how we live our daily lives. And then also, when considering building future cities, how can you make those decisions easier for the people that exist within the city? How can you make sure that the services that they need and that the way that they move within the city is accessible and low carbon? So these are all things and decisions that don't require any technologies at all. They just require thoughtful design. And again, you'll hear me come back to consultation and collaboration with the community.
Great point. And any good engineer will tell you that they are the least important on a team in terms of the technology. Always has to follow what the public will accept and can participate in. Great point. Thank you.
I wanted to jump on to that point
great.
as well, just because, I definitely want to lift up what Janessa was saying around cultural shift and how important that is, and definitely designing cities where we can meet people's needs in a way that, makes things easy. A lot of the time people are, they care about the qualities and their experiences, but they don't really care about what the technology is or where the energy is coming from. But I did want to just mention that, we do need to definitely, in addressing climate change, shift where our power, our energy comes from, because right now in Canada, the largest source of fossil fuel emissions, the largest source of pollution, is the production of oil and gas. And so we need to be shifting away from that production of oil and gas in order to lower emissions and address climate change and bring other power sources onto the grid to take care of our cities and other things. And as Daniel mentioned, we've already got places in Canada and BC, Quebec, Ontario that have fairly clean energy systems. But I just wanted to mention that the production of fossil fuels is a huge contributor to climate change because it uses so much energy in the production and produces the most emissions in Canada. So we, when we're thinking about how we make more power and address climate change, that energy transition piece around our electricity system is super crucial.
Great. Janessa?
I just wanted to very quickly add to Amelia's really excellent point of transitioning away from carbon intensive energy sources, just to highlight that buildings and transportation, which are some of the questions that keep trickling forward, those are the two sectors that are the highest producing GHG emitters. So Amelia's point is so fantastic because, those are two sectors that can have a really, really strong impact if reduction in greenhouse gas emissions within those sectors could be improved or advanced through, divesting from fossil fuel intensive energy sources. So I just wanted to add on to Amelia's point.
Well, that's a great point. In Canada, the fossil fuels used in our vehicles and heating our buildings are almost 60% of our greenhouse gas emissions. That's a big chunk. Anyone else? I really like this question, by the way. What is the most common mistake or oversight that people do when developing a city? Anybody want to try that one?
That's a big one too. I'll get started. I might even start with this concept of consumerism. We've talked about how people make decisions. We don't connect ourselves to the impact of our choices. So whether we're buying imported fancy fruit or a local potato, that kind of thing. On this topic is our cities are so overwhelmingly in North America designed for the automobile and cars. And that doesn't have to be the case. It wasn't always the case in human history, and many people would argue that it's made our lives worse. So in engineering, we're often handcuffed by what has come before. If I'm a civil engineer for the city, I can't move 10,000 people from one neighborhood to another if I want to get rid of cars and make it a pedestrian-oriented development. But maybe in 100 years we could. So perhaps we could think about how, we gradually just change how we make these decisions and what we put first. Is it the individual consumerist cars and plane tickets, or is it more of this societal thing where I just value being close to my neighbors and I have this apartment building and we have a green terraced roof and that kind of social architecture? Yeah. And I'm sure the other panelists have things to add.
Thanks, Connor. Leslie Ann?
Yeah, I'll add. And I'm also, my answer is also going to kind of touch on the question about public health and climate impact. Our cities are so much more than just the physical buildings. As Connor mentioned, our cities are also where we have our communities, where we interact with people, where all of our other needs are met when you're living in that city. It's where your social network is. It's where you eat. It's where you get your water. And so when we're building cities, we want to make sure we do them in a way, as Connor said, that also enables all of those aspects of our life, which are also really tied to our health. If we don't have spaces where we can socialize, where we can spend time outdoors, it's going to affect our health. If our city is located in a place where the water or the air is polluted, it's also going to affect our health. And so I think for historically a long time, our cities were built where it was just convenient. Often they're near the water because that used to be historically how we traveled. But if we are building new cities, we have the opportunity to dream and also think about where are we going to put our cities and how are we going to do it in a way that encourages people's health. Some of the impacts of climate change on health include things like increased forest fires, longer fire seasons, additional air pollution, and as well, in some places, losing stability in the ground itself, if the permafrost is melting, if you're going to be impacted by flooding. And so when we design our cities, we want to make sure that we're putting them in places and building them in ways that help address some of those expected and current impacts from climate change on our health as well.
Thanks, Leslie Ann. Janessa, and then Amelia.
Thanks. So this is a really fantastic question. Thank you so much for asking it. And I don't know if you noticed, but I chuckled a little bit when you asked it because my mind immediately went back to what I have been saying all session, which is the biggest failure, I think, is the failure to consult and the failure to collaborate. Because thinking about, I think a lot of folks in the room today, they reside in Western Canada and I am in Eastern Canada, and I could have some phenomenal ideas for how to integrate some renewable energy project in the West, but I've never lived there. It's not my lived experience. I have never existed in this space for a prolonged period of time or seen the seasons changed or identified, as Leslie Ann had highlighted, the different hazards that exist in that region. And in the absence of my knowledge about those different hazards and about that climate, I need to consult the community, that will have to be forced to live with the infrastructure that I decide to build there. And so again, I'll come back to, in the past, there have been a lot of missed opportunities to consult when it comes to developing infrastructure. And I think that that is a big thing that we can learn from, because we have seen firsthand the negative impacts of failing to consult and what can result when that happens. So that's I'll get off my soapbox. I know I've been touting that all session.
All right, thanks, Janessa. And Amelia, did you have?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to thank Leslie Ann for bringing up adaptation, because that's what I was initially going to say, is that it's a new thing. Adapting to climate change is something that designers and engineers didn't have to consider, but now we do. And so looking at how your region will be affected by climate change and designing your city for those adaptations is really important. And then the other thing I wanted to include too is coming back to this idea around externalities that we talked about at the beginning, and also ecosystem services. So, for example, we might think about designing, or an engineer might think about designing wastewater management systems or water cleaning systems. And you can also look to the natural environment and ecosystems in your area for ways that nature is already doing that work for you. So you have a marsh, for example, is a wastewater management system. And so I think it's also important, sometimes what's been missed in cities is we think that we have to build things ourselves when protecting parts of nature that are already providing certain services or serving certain functions that benefit us is a really also valuable thing to think about when you're thinking about designing your city. And that has definitely been overlooked in the past too.
Great point. Shall we try one more question before we do our roundup? Maybe Julian's question about how our lives will look, how your lives will look in 40 years' time, in 2064. Maybe we can, now that you have this esteemed panelists, we'll give you our best guess estimates of what things might be like in 2064. Who wants to start? It's a big question, Julian.
I can start a little bit.
Okay.
And I want to preface this with, the question's assuming that climate change has taken full effect. And I just want to say at the start that it doesn't have to be that way. You still absolutely have an opportunity to change things. And I think that's really important, because it's so easy to get bogged down in the the scariness and the horror and the stress and feel like we can't change anything, but we can still avoid that. But to me, if climate change does take full effect in 40 years, what we might be seeing are things like a lot less species of wildlife. We're facing a biodiversity crisis where we're losing entire species because places they've lived in become too warm or their food sources are disappearing. And that might sound like not a big deal, but ecosystems are built to rely on each other and to be a web. And as we start losing species, we lose more and more. And that can have all kinds of impacts that we don't even know yet. I think we'll see quite, as we've already started seeing, and I've mentioned this is one of mine that I tend to focus on is the forest fires. Not only longer seasons, but we're also starting to see them happening in places we typically don't, often closer to urban centers that has felt like they're unaffected for many years. Weather impacts. Not only are things going to be hotter, but we might be seeing more unpredictable weather, bigger storms. And I think we're going to start to see a human impact as well when, you know, our generation are starting to see things that we remember as kids just be gone, be things that we can't show our children, whether it be places or wildlife or things like that, that I think will also take a very human, mental, and emotional toll on us. So there's some of what I would anticipate if climate change does happen. Definitely not an exhaustive list by any means.
Yeah, I can chip in with part of an answer. It ties to the question about are the icebergs melting faster? And ultimately, the simplest answer to that question is yes. Like Leslie talked about feedback loops, where we have put carbon into the air, that traps more heat in the planet is warmer, some glaciers melt in the polar regions, creating more dark surfaces that absorb more sunlight, and it perpetuates. So to a certain extent, 2064 will be different because those feedback loops are initiated and started. We can absolutely do many things to reduce their impact, and maybe by the end of the century have a smaller change. But something is going to happen, and we'll have to brace as a society for that. I'll tell you what my hope is. My hope is, instead of the world's nations fracturing and becoming nationalist and isolationist and only worrying about their own interests, I hope that we come together more to respond to this issue. We saw how even COVID can disrupt supply chains and how fragile our global web can be. Just large destabilizing events, which are only going to become more and more common. The oceans will rise. If no other reason, then they've just become warmer, and things expand when they get warmer, and that will displace people. There may be tens or hundreds of millions of displaced refugees by this year date that we will need to, again, as a global society, care for. Yeah.
Good point.
Maybe I'll jump on there and also try and do a double question hitter, because there's the one I see on there about how climate change affects people's health. So in addition to the extreme weather events or direct risks from climate change induced crises like the heat dome or a flood, there's also with warmer temperatures a higher spread of disease. Certain illnesses and diseases are more able to survive in warmer temperatures. So there's a whole series of health impacts related to climate change, and there's a growing field that is really dedicated to how climate and health intersect. And I think the thing to remember is that climate change affects everything. So whatever your interest in, there will be an intersection between, agriculture and climate, and the way that climate change is shifting seasonal patterns or drought and extreme rain are going to affect our agricultural systems. And so how is that industry going to adapt, and how are we going to manage our food production so that we can still have healthy, thriving societies? So climate change does certainly impact people's health. We'll be dealing with these things in 2064. All of the other panelists gave great answers already to what that will look like. what we have to be thoughtful about. And so I think how our lives will change is that we have to be resilient, and we have to learn to be adaptable to change is the key thing, because the climate will continue to change once it's started, and there's so much new that we have to learn how to live with, how to take care of each other through, and how to problem solve, which means there's going to be really exciting spaces for innovation, but also crucially alongside these types of technology developments that you're going to imagine for your new cities, a real attention to how we address the social problems that climate change also causes. So that care and collaboration and the sort of political side or the social side of cities becomes also really crucial, because you need to be able to create places where people can work together in a good way. So I don't know what will happen in 2064. Certainly there will be impacts from climate change that we have to learn how to figure out. But I think something you can do, and something that we all will need to do, is just learn to get better at dealing with change and practicing being adaptable and resilient through change, because that's the sort of uncertainty and unpredictability about the future is the one thing we can kind of count on.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Amelia. Janessa?
There's not much that I can add to the comments that have been made by Leslie Ann, Connor, and Amelia, because they've been really fantastic. Just to say that there are a lot of negative impacts that we will see in the future, and a lot of them have been highlighted already. And I think oftentimes I summarize them by just saying warmer, wetter, wilder. We're going to have more hot days and all the impacts that are associated with hot days. We're going to be wetter, which means more precipitation, more flooding, and all the things that are associated with what wet means. And wilder, meaning that we have more extremes, more extreme storms, more extreme wildfires, as Leslie Ann has highlighted a number of times. And so, yes, we're going to be experiencing a lot more things that will require a lot of the adaptation measures that Amelia and the other panelists have highlighted, as well as mitigation measures. But the reality is that we are changing, and we're going to continue to see change. But I want to take a page out of Connor's book by highlighting that I am hopeful. I'm very hopeful, because there is a new generation following in our footsteps. And this new generation is you. It's the people on the other side of the screen, which unfortunately I can't see. But you are equipped with more information, with more motivation, with more creativity, to make a change, a lasting change, and to really highlight and bring forward all of your new knowledge, to make a change in our future cities.
Well, that's a great point. And I would argue that that's the hopeful thing as well. And I think one important point for 2064 is the good news about that is that by 2064, I think the world will have stopped procrastinating and blaming each other for what should be done on fossil fuel. And the world will definitely be in high gear in terms of action. So maybe, I think, Rebecca, do you want us to go around one quick round and sort of summary thoughts from the panelists?
I would love to hear like a one sentence, like last sort of words of advice as these students embark on this very interesting challenge.
Great. Well, why don't we the same order, maybe, to speed things up? Connor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, that works for me. I think my hope is actually that we get more different kinds of engineers. So whoever you are sitting in the classroom out there, even if you haven't met someone who looks like you, who is an engineer, I would implore you to consider it as a profession, because we need just more different people tackling these issues. So yeah, please come join us.
Great. Good. Janessa?
I think that that's really great, Connor. As a non-engineer myself, I'm like, yeah, I want to join the engineers. And I would just add that, just be creative and be bold and don't let people silence you, because your ideas have merit and your ideas have worth and they matter. And so I'll just end with that by just saying that, whatever ideas you have, bring them forward. Don't let anyone silence you.
Nice. Amelia?
My final thought, I guess, would be this is a really exciting opportunity for you to imagine not just what's possible based on our current cities and your day-to-day lives, but what you really want in a city, how to meet your needs, how to meet your community's needs. And and I think the opportunity for imagination here is exciting. And just to echo what everybody else has sort of said around optimism, climate change can be scary, but there's so much happening now and that will continue to happen going forward. But everywhere you look, there's wonderful work being done, and it's a privilege to get to talk to other folks who are also working on climate change in different ways. But just to lift up this idea that there's no one way to be an engineer, there's no one way to work on climate change, and that whatever interests you, there's a way to bring together your imagination, your creativity, your care about climate change, and all of your other interests.
Nice. Leslie Ann?
Thank you. And I second everything that the other panelists have said, but one of the really big things I want you to remember is dream big and imagine big. And similarly, don't let anyone silence you, but don't silence yourself. Dream big, picture big. I'm of a generation that when I was your age, the technology to use these earbuds that I'm using right now to talk to you just didn't exist, and not none of us, clearly someone could imagine it, but a lot of us could never have imagined it existing. And it's really easy to forget how far we've come in not a long time. And so dream big and push yourself and push the others around you to dream big, because you never know what can happen.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd like to thank all the panelists. And I guess my point would be, have fun. I mean, things might look dire, but they're not. There's lots and lots of room for optimism. We're going to figure it out. You're going to figure it out. And the one point I would also make is, a lot of times when you look at these big problems, you wonder, well, how, where do we start? What can be done? Is a country against country and this and that? Never underestimate the power of your city. That is sort of the fulcrum of global action, is your city, starting with your community, your neighborhood, your school. That's how things have changed in the world. You build better cities, you build a better world. So yeah, thank you for joining, and good luck.
Thank you so much to everyone today. I wanted to give a big thank you to all of the students that are joining us. You asked so many amazing questions. That is so exciting for us to see. You're in that initial stage in the engineering design process where you're learning all the things and asking really interesting questions and digging into the problem and really trying to understand all the different parts to it. So thank you for bringing that to this experience today. And of course, to your teachers for helping to get you here today. And to echo you, Dan, thank you again to all of the panelists for bringing your wonderfully diverse perspectives and insights and experiences so that we can, ask more questions and maybe think about things in a different way. And thanks to you, Dan, for moderating this wonderful discussion today. Our partners doing all the production here at Ontario Tech. We're so grateful to have you so we can have this platform to help get these messages across. And also, again, thank you to Engineers Canada. So with that, we will wrap things up and can't wait to see what you all come up with. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.